Excellent. We are live, Chris. Live.
Back again.
Back again. We're talking about Cowboys, Rebels, Troublemakers, Part 2.
My favorite kind of sales rep.
There you go. Hiring strategies for the launch sales team.
Yep.
Let's talk about what we're going to talk about, then we'll get into it.
Yep.
Last time we talked about who you want on your product launch sales team for disruptive tech. Who do you want? And Chris kind of quoted this, the Renaissance rep. This live stream will dig deeper into how to find them. All right, how do we find these folks?
Yep.
Whether hiring new or identifying them in your existing sales team. Cool. And how to manage them to achieve market scale. That's important. And accelerating revenue as quickly as possible. So what we're going to talk about, selecting the team.
Yep.
Once assembled, how to optimize the performance of that team.
Yep.
Comp plans, money. And then after launch success, what do you do with your special forces team now that sales are coming in? Anything I missed there, Chris?
No, that's kind of what I think it'd be fun to cover all that today. If we have time, we'll see.
Okay. So we talked about the special forces team. People can go back and hear more about that logic. Now we're going to dig deeper into the identities, practices for managing. So, Mr. Chris.
Yes.
You sure you're ready?
I'm ready.
Talk about the profile of the sales rep best suited for the early days of a product launch.
Yeah, well, you and I started. You started teasing this out of me last time when we were talking about how do we identify these folks. And I think I thought since we talked last, I thought about this even more. And the key one, and kind of the starter for all this, is that thing we talked about, that the sales rep that has that creative angst, that creative side to them. You and I talked about the divergent thinker is, typically your sales rep is this convergent, linear, logical thinker, executor of the plan. But these, the rep you need for these launching these disruptive products in the early days, they got to have this creative side, because a lot of the plan isn't quite figured out yet. The market plan, the sales model, all that. So kind of the thing I'm always looking for most is this creative side. This, to me, it showed up, and I've seen this in other reps. There's a restlessness in these folks, kind of what makes them Cowboys, Rebels, and Troublemakers. So the first one is this creative, this divergent side to their personality.
Okay. So it's not just about following the process. That doesn't turn their crank.
No, well, actually, that's why they're Cowboys, Rebels, and Troublemakers, because you put them in that environment, the typical sales environment. They're going to be tweaking things. They're going to be changing things. They're going to be testing things, because they've got this side that wants that kind of has to do that. So,
I understand that very, very well.
Oh yeah.
But what else?
So the other thing, and there's lots of things. So you and I talked about this. One is, they tend to be a strong performer on the team, but they might not be your top performers.
They won't be your top performer.
No, not on the regular team, because they're not wired to be that, that day in, day out, just crank it like your best sales reps do.
That's right.
But the other thing that I find, and one of the things that makes them not their best performers, is they tend to be very cross. I was talking with someone about this just yesterday. They tend to be cross-functional.
Yep, they're interested. They're curious.
They're curious, so they end up working with or engaging with marketing on messaging or testing out new.
They're probably the marketing team's favorite salesperson.
They could be, or they could be their biggest pain in the butt too, right?
Probably most likely, either or. But basically, they might be pushing marketing because they don't like the copy, or they might be going to marketing, asking them for new stuff and new ideas and new thoughts and new ways to position. Good point.
But usually they'll come to marketing with new ideas, which, if marketing is smart, and they're agile and they're cross-functional thinking, they'll welcome it. But they'll also be working with R&D. They'll be asking about what the next product features are coming out, what's next, what's coming. They'll also be suggesting to R&D, I mean, I had this one rep I worked with in this service, this genomic services company, and the rep would actually train the lab techs how to talk to customers because he knew that that for he could bring in the first batch of samples for the lab, but to really ramp up and get the larger business, the interaction with the lab was critical. So he was working with the lab techs on how to interact with customers. Obviously helped the company, but also helped him. It was selfish for me there. So that's like they'll be working with different parts of the company, and they'll seek that out. So that's the other one. This idea of that they're a bit of a risk taker. They're willing to try new things. Maybe in that same way, they're a bit of a visionary. Risk taker, visionary. They kind of come together. They'll try things. They'll test things. They're comfortable with. You talk about this all the time. VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty.
They like it. It's intriguing to them.
They're kind of attracted by it. So and most importantly, they're not afraid of it. They're willing to deal with ambiguity, not knowing.
And I like your concept, the fact that they will challenge leadership, positive, negative.
They'll be that sales rep. They'll be the one that will kind of tell leadership maybe what they don't want to hear, but they need to hear, type of thing.
Yeah, precisely. This messaging is wrong. It's not going to work. I don't know where it came from.
Right.
You're never going to get that number. I don't know what you're talking about. If you go to any industry, any marketplace, that number is not going to happen.
They'll do stuff like that. They'll say, hey, listen, our product's not working because of this reason. Here's the pushback we're getting. A lot of times management, goes at, kind of puts their hands over their ears and doesn't listen to that stuff. But these are the type of people that will, when you ask them for candid feedback, they'll actually won't be afraid to give it to you.
I like that. And you talk about the fact they're very big on their customer. They got more loyalty maybe to their customer than the organization in some cases.
I've seen that happen a lot of times when I'm out working with these type of reps in the field. Man, they're voracious about about managing and supporting and helping their customers. Sometimes they'll, as you said, they'll even put the customer in front of the company, which frankly a lot that's a big trend today. Customer centric, enterprises. The customer kind of needs to be first.
You gotta delight your customer, like Steve Denning says. That drives all the energy of the organization. I mean, that's but the flip side is in sales, you have that balancing act between the margin versus the revenue versus is it something that we want to sell or is it something you're forcing us to sell something? So you have this balancing act, and that's why the repeatable, scalable side of sales doesn't necessarily like these folks because it throws that side of the house out of whack.
It does. So and when you're in when you're at scale and you're operating and trying to drive efficiency into your process, sometimes this can be disruptive.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But remember what we're talking about is the launch of a disruptive product.
Yeah,
these are the people you need to
precisely. It's like, okay, how do we pull those folks in? So relentless, restless, creative, not a good, strong professional, but maybe not your best performing salesperson.
Yep.
They're definitely got some well-likeness. The people want to connect with them. Cross-functional. They're going to want to look at all different angles of the situation, of the product, company, the direction. Good communicators. Very customer-focused.
Yep.
They're open to taking risks. You're going to see. They're going to be a square peg in a round hole in your repeat scale sales process.
They're going to kind of be the the cowboy rebel and troublemaker in the group.
Yeah, they're going
to be a bit of an outlier, but they're not bad people. They're not bad performers. They're just going to be they're going to be a little eccentric, might be another way to look at it.
Yeah, precisely. That's a great point of saying it. And by the way, we forgot to mention comments, thoughts, questions. You can post them as comments in LinkedIn here. We'll pop your comment up on the screen. We'll talk about your comment. Share it amongst the group. So don't hesitate to put those things in. if you so desire. Okay, Chris.
Yeah, please jump in.
I can see why they might be perceived as Cowboys, rebels, and troublemakers.
Exactly. Now, the other thing, Dave, before we go on, the other thing that's kind of interesting here, and it may not, is that they need to be a team player.
Yep.
To be working, on the launch team for Disrupt product, it needs to be a team, and we'll talk a little bit about more later. But that's kind of the other thing here that they need to be. They can't be your good performing cowboy rebel troublemaker that's just this pure lone wolf that has this huge ego and doesn't.
Yeah, it's about, and part of their thing is to support their customer, so they're selfless about their customer. All right, they might have. They're also selfless about the team. They just go about it more aggressively. They go about it under different situations. Whereas a typical repeat and scale salesperson is going to make more calls, going to make more contacts, is going to go back and do more details as it relates to the current customers that they have. This person is going to branch out and try to look at different things.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've been in situations where that selflessness is interesting because they put the customer in front of themselves. Sometimes they put the company. I've found myself in that situation. Sometimes it gets misinterpreted as selfishness, and that's really interesting to identify these people. There's a bit of selflessness in this that
the most selfish salesperson is always talking about their commission, their bonus. They're maximizing return on time associated with compensation. Yep. They have no desire to do anything that's not going to give them return on comp. The adage people say is coin operated. I hear way too many people saying that's the best salesperson. It's not. In a lot of cases, it's not. So,
a lot of cases, it's not. And in this case, you really don't want those people in this group. And one of the things I find about these type of, these Cowboys is they look to help their fellow reps, their peers. They're always helping them, or the peers are often coming to them for advice. Because the peers kind of intuitively know that they're doing some things that are different than everybody else. They're looking for them as a kind of their leadership, even though that might not be recognized inside of, formally recognized in any way.
I like this idea that Cowboy can be seen as the fact that they're late in putting their CRM information in. That's certainly true. That's definitely true.
Most definitely.
I have that problem. I'll tell you that for sure.
That's the other thing about these. They tend not to like to follow rules at all. So, which is actually, if on your launch team, you kind of, and we're going to talk about in the management structure, how to manage these people. You want these people that don't want to follow the rules. That's exactly what you're looking for. But on your scale stage sales force, that doesn't fit real well.
No, you don't want those folks at all. I mean, certainly when you're repeat and scale side, the first thing, are they process folks? If they're not process folks, they're repeat and sales side, they're not going to work out. They're not detail folks, they're not going to work out. Yeah. Certainly a detailed person in a product launch situation is not necessarily a good fit.
No, in the product launch, it tends to be a balance. They've got to do enough of that to be. You need to have a little bit of that process and that routine to get results, but you need this little chaotic creative side going on too at the same time.
I love the idea they get in trouble at compliance. Absolutely. And that's why, precisely. And then finally, go ahead.
As we get into the management side, that's exactly those folks that you want on the launch team. So.
And I think Todd really hit it here. Look at Todd's comment, the reference to the Renaissance mindset. It's exactly right. They're not necessarily turned on by the booking. They're turned in the money from the booking. They're turned on by the fact that they figured things out and found this booking within their logic and thought process and positioning. And it's like, man, God, I found this in all of this. Yep. Compared to I found this and I'm going to get cash for it.
Exactly. And that's, you hit it right on, both you and Todd in that one. That's been my experience too. And they, and because of this creative side, if they can solve problems, if they can, figure out the puzzle, that's what drives these folks.
Figuring out the puzzle, yes, that's a good
challenge of it is what drives them. And they're also, because they're this creative side, they tend to have the bigger picture in mind, so they don't.
Yes, they're system thinkers. They're system thinkers. They see the system.
That's a perfect term for it. They're a system thinker. They can go up to 20,000 feet and go down to 2 feet all at the same time.
See, whereas a repeat and scale person doesn't give a crap about the system.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And that's okay. It's not bad.
I think I might have shared this before. I was working with a sales rep for a client of mine, and they were in this situation. They were launching a disruptive product, and he was this repeat and rinse type of guy. Tell me the playbook and let me get at it.
He's like an engine.
He was so frustrated with me because he's getting pressure from his regional sales manager to perform and the VP to perform, and they didn't give him the tools. David, I couldn't believe it. He was in tears with me in the car driving one day. He was so frustrated. And that's when you put these type of sales reps in this situation where they're not ready to, when you don't have a Renaissance sales rep trying to sell at launch of the disrupt product, they're going to be extremely frustrated. And they're going to be literally lost.
That's right. I agree. And I'm coaching two, as I keep saying, I'm coaching one client, and I continue to try to present this concept. And now I'm coaching a new client, and she definitely is going to have and sees the need for this type of mindset to search out new opportunities, especially because they're launching a new product.
So is she looking to hire her first person, or is she trying to kind of?
Well, she's getting pressure to say, okay, you have this new product. I want you to launch it. And of course, what do they want to do? They want to launch it within the current sales team.
Yeah.
And she realizes that it's a different buying persona. It's a different reason for why you want to incorporate that product. And there has to be a new way of looking at how to position that, because even though it comes from the same company, it's not necessarily going to ring against what they usually sell. Yeah,
I was having that conversation with a friend of mine about the exact same thing, where they try to drop in this product. It is not at scale yet, and they haven't figured out the sales process. They try to drop it in with the regular sales team, and it really struggles. Because on a sales team that scale, most of these people are going to be these convergent thinkers, these linear thinkers, these and they're not going to be able to adapt to that type of environment. You drop that product in, and this is where I see the biggest failure of most companies is they try to take a product that's disruptive, drop it into existing sales force, and it fails, and then they say it's the product. The product. That's right. The market's not ready. And, sometimes that's true, but most times it's not. Most times they're just not managing the sales process properly.
The sales process is wrong.
Giving that sales force what they need to be effective. Now, the question with her is, share with her the criteria we talked about today.
I sent her this script as a conversation starter for sure. So now let's talk about you can cut these people out of your current sales organization, but what happens if you have to hire cold? So how do you hire these folks? How do you find them? What questions do you ask? How do you probe and dig in to find this type of person?
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on that too, as you might imagine. So first of all, I don't know what the actual number is, but if you go, in my experience, if you go into this, if I've in working with sales teams, it's a small percentage. It's definitely less than 10% of sales force that has this capability. It's probably somewhere in the 3 to 5% range is what my guess is. So first of all, you're looking for needles in haystacks. So there's some low hanging fruit. One is just ask them how many products they've sold for the first time. Have they ever been involved selling a product launch? One of the things I would ask, and if the answer is yes, first of all, then I'd ask them a lot of questions about the product. And what you're looking for there is to find out if it's truly an innovative, disruptive product or if it's an incremental improvement. If you have pens that are, if you're selling pens and they're all black, and you come out with this new version of a pen that's writes in red and blue, that's incremental.
Yeah,
that's not that big a deal. But maybe that's the first, find out if they've ever sold a new product. If they have never sold an initial product before, if they've never been involved, don't hire them. That's kind of the first thing.
Talk to them about the resume things. I thought the resume point was really cool. We talked about beforehand.
So one of the things I find in a resume, don't be concerned if they jumped around a lot. A lot of times you look at a resume, if someone moves jobs a lot, that's a negative. In this case, there's a good chance it may not be. I mean, and the other thing is that you'll find on the resume these type of people will jump around. Let med tech, which is where I operate and we normally talk about. A lot of times you'll see a rep will jump jobs, but they'll stay in the same specialty.
All right, let's repeat and scale person jumping jobs to get better base salary, maybe better commission plan, to sell their book of business. Okay, great. Yeah. What you're saying is that a Renaissance person does what?
Well, he may, so that guy might, you might see him jumping around the same, ophthalmology or orthopedics. They might jump from one orthopedic company to the next. The Renaissance rep might jump from orthopedics to, selling orthopedic implants. I mean, I'm speaking this from experience because this was me. Selling orthopedic implants to selling healthcare IT to jumping into genomic services, selling to biotech and pharma. Those were kind of 3 jobs in a row. Yep. Now that's the indication of someone that might be a Renaissance rep. These guys that are looking for new challenges. So if you see them moving around, but they're jumping like that, that might be a good thing, especially if they had pretty good performance in those. That's roles.
Very, very interesting, thought process there, and one that goes against some of the things that I initially look at in a resume. But true, it's about matching the person up to the position. The position profile is X.
Correct.
So the resume will show that fact that they might have some of those issues. Now let's talk about your interview questions because that ties to it. Especially the second from the bottom one, I like a lot. So what are some of these interview questions?
Yeah, you want me to start? The second from the bottom was, have you ever been fired?
Yeah, right. And why?
And why were you fired? I mean,
but but in your mind, it's a good thing.
Well, it could be, right? It depends on the circumstances. I've seen where, these you put a Renaissance rep with a traditionally trained sales manager, especially middle manager.
Oh, they're going to fire him. Yeah, I get you.
They're going to fire them. They're going to fire them because they're going to constantly challenge them. And a VP of sales in a traditional company or even a regional sales manager in a traditional company gets with these reps, they're not going to follow their rules. They're going to be they're going to be rebels, Cowboys, and troublemakers, and there's a good chance they'll get fired over that. I've seen it. It's happened to me. I've talked to many other people that it's happened to as well.
So here's a different vision of a scientist, present a different vision. So Todd's talking about the type of person we're looking for. I call this intellectual curiosity. So these folks he presents are folks that dabbled in lots of different areas.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. That's a good experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I like that aspect of it because what you're looking at is a salesperson with intellectual curiosity.
Correct.
Who knows how to sell, but also has a level of curiosity around digging in and figuring things out and learning, whereas most traditional salespeople would see that as overhead, inefficiency.
Yep.
Not let me maximize dollar and time.
Yep. So another question you might ask is, have you ever been at odds with your manager or boss? How did you, why, and the other thing that I noticed is, the questions I would ask would be why, not what, because you want to understand their thinking behind it. And a creative thinker or a Renaissance rep will think differently than the traditional.
No, I soft ed myself and my boss. We respectfully had many debates like this, challenging many thought processes. And I respectfully accepted some of his decisions where I didn't believe, and that was my choice to say, okay, I'll work in that box, but I would challenge his box, and I continue to challenge his box all the time.
Yep, and that's
respectfully.
And that's exactly what these reps will do. They will, we talked about that. They'll challenge. Yep. And if they get the right boss, that's a wonderful scenario.
Yeah, then they can fly.
If you get the wrong boss, you get fired.
That's right. You get fired.
So, a lot of times I've seen in these cases, it's not it's leadership is the challenge, not the rep, not the rep. These people are wired differently. They operate differently. So when you get into the job interviews, you've got to be looking for this different type of person. This one that's going to challenge, this one that's going to test ideas. And those type of people, you put them, when you interview them, they may have had situations where things got pretty sticky and challenging, and you want to probe into that because you're kind of looking for those. You're looking for those situations. You're also looking. They also tend to be, and this is really interesting to me. They tend to be very candid. These folks.
Well, they have Todd would know this. They have some safety, they have psychological safety. They trust in their skill sets. They trust in their abilities and such. They can use the term that Agilists use is called radical candor. This is, Todd, Chris calls this agile market entry. So the premise he has put together here is all agile. And so I don't know if you knew the full background associated with it, but this is the mindset. Now we're talking about the kind of the leaders of the agile market entry push. And these are the sales reps doing the selling. So how do you manage these folks, Chris? How do you manage them?
So that's an interesting question, David. So it's not so much that you manage them, you actually guide them. And here's one of the most fundamental things is you don't give them the plan, you don't give them the rules. Frankly, when you're launching a disrupt product, we've talked about this in previous discussions. The plans, the go-to-market plans based on assumptions anyway. So,
oh God, drives me so crazy.
It's basically the sales plans.
I was just doing that yesterday with somebody and another client about revisiting the second half budget. I'm like, we have no scale repeat, so let's just throw some things out there because I have nothing to base it off of.
Pretty much when you're now. So when you're in that situation, you got to figure out what you need to focus on to get the scale and repeat. That's a critical thing.
Yeah,
you're right. You're making up. So let's getting back to this conversation. You don't manage them by telling them what to do. You actually tell them. You give them the boundaries to operate. And I was talking with someone about this the other day. I said, listen, you encourage them to take risks, to learn, to test, try, to fail. But the most important thing you do is you give them the boundaries to operate within, and then say inside those boundaries, encourage them to test and try and fail. And so that's the first thing is you don't manage them, you guide them. You give them the guide rail and then let them go to work and let them do what they naturally want to do, which is try new things, learn new things, figure out the puzzle. So that's the first thing is you got to switch your management style. Conventional sales management is to tell the reps what to do and then expect them to execute. That's what we talked about. So this is completely flipped its head on that. If you think about it, it's kind of the definition of a servant leadership.
And the big book you like to talk about here is the book that a lot of Agilists talk about. That book is Team of Teams.
Well, that's how to make. I mean, General Stanley McChrystal, when he was in Afghanistan, ran into this with his special forces teams because they tried to tell him what to do, and the enemy was changing so quickly they couldn't manage it from top down, so they had to distribute out management. They had to give them. They had to put the right. They had to put the right people in the right situation and let them get the job done. And that's very much true here. It's a great book that talks about this. And you want to talk about someone that probably had to let go of a lot of what he was trained to do and what was drilled into him from very early days. There's a guy that had to really relearn how to manage people. And he talks about, and the other thing that comes from the book is that the real data to tell you what to do comes from the ground up. It comes from the field up, or
that's right. Decisions are made at the locus of the activities. That sales rep has got a lot of things moving around, so they have to make decisions on how to pivot, adjust, price.
Yes. So when
price accordingly.
When you talk about guidelines, price is a guideline. Here's what you can price within.
Yeah, it can't be rigid. If it's rigid, you're not going to do anything. That drives me crazy all the time. How are you going to sell rigid pricing when you're searching and trying to figure things out? You price based on the relative value of the market. But that's for someone definitely in a agile market entry time mindset. So, Chris, we got a couple minutes left.
Yes.
We haven't gotten the compensation. We haven't really dug into the right leadership mindset, right team, how to manage. So how do you want to end this? And maybe continuation, but we do have a question too.
Okay, cool. Let's get.
How long can you go with these types of reps, and when do you transition to more traditional selling? Great question. Do these reps become directors, or they let go? Great question. How does one manage this delicate transition? I mean, there you go, Chris. Probably one of the best questions
That's a perfect question to lead in. So one is, when do you know? It's when they get the repeatability. That is the critical here. When you have a small, and I suggest you start with a small team, 2, 3, 4, and let them go to work. When you can see that the sales process,
they're going to go to marketing and say, hey, marketing, send this blast to this group because this group seems really interested. They're going to say, every time I call this position up, I'm getting a potential meeting. You're going to see that consistency.
They're going to see it consistent. And it's not just going to be consistent on that, Dave. It's going to be consistent right on through the revenue.
Yeah, exactly. And they like that because they want to win. I mean, ultimately, these people want to win. They just don't want to manage it forever. They don't want to manage that consistency forever.
So the answer to the question is, once you get the repeatability, then you can start testing it to a broader and broader team and see if it then repeats across the team. This is all about getting to repeatability in the sales process. So it's actually pretty easy if you think about what the primary goal is here. And if you get repeatability and consistency across the small agile market entry special forces team, then you start distributing out and see if you can expand.
Whenever I talk to this person this way, I'm going to get a pipeline activity.
When I contact this type of profile customer, I talk to them with this messaging, and I get through the sales cycle and the processing closing cycle this way, and then we get to adoption, we get to a satisfied customer. Once we get repeatability there within the team, then we can start disseminating.
How many do you have? 2 or 3 of those? I mean, how does it work out? Exactly.
Yeah. And if you're a startup, you scale up the team then, right?
Yeah.
And if you're the bigger company and you start with this small team, then you start pushing out to the rest of the sales force and see if you can.
And let me try to give him an answer. Jonathan's great question. The answer on the other part is what do you do with these folks? I mean, in the volatility, you have to constantly change and sell something new. You got to constantly testing new things to sell. It's almost like you create a team within the sales group that's testing all the new things that are going out to sell. So the team almost stays a team, and then let's go on to this new product that we want to launch, and let's go on to this new product that we want to launch. Oh, let's go on to this new product we want to launch. So it's almost like, hopefully at some point in time, sales organization adds another group, and that's the agile market entry team, which is tied directly to product deployment and testing out all these ideas.
Yep. And so in a big company, I think that's a huge competitive advantage, having a team that can do this, drop them in and do the next launch. The other place, David, if you're in a startup company, a lot of times your initial market entry point is a smaller niche. So then push out that smaller niche to the broader sales force, and then let this team figure out the next market segment to open up. So there's lots of different ways. But I would not disassemble this team. I'd try not to roll it back into the regular sales force, because it is a huge competitive advantage.
Outstanding. So any last comments before we let folks go? Great conversation, great interaction. Appreciate everybody's time. Chris, anything?
If anybody has any questions they have for me afterwards or want to chat, just reach out through LinkedIn. I'd love to chat with you more. Great questions today. I love the interaction, and look forward to having more of these.
Thank you all. Have a great one. Talk to you later.